Hello one and all, and welcome to another top 10 video. Today's video was actually requested to me about 3 or 4 months ago by Nightlife, and I loved the idea so much I'd been working on my list on and off since then, and now I bring it to you. So thank you Nightlife for the request. Here is my top 10 female protagonists with a twist. This means I'm discussing times where a film's female protagonist was revealed to be the antagonist, and since the original comment was left on my top 10 female horror villains video, I'm focusing on horror films. Obviously, this video contains spoilers, so I have placed timestamps in the description box along with the film titles so you know which ones to avoid if you haven't seen them. With that out of the way, let's begin the countdown. Number 10's pick comes from French film Haute Tension, also known as High Tension or Switchblade Romance as it was called in some countries, meaning my character pick is of course Marie. Now the film follows friends Alex and Marie who travel to stay with Alex's parents, and one night a deranged serial killer breaks in, murders the parents and abducts Alex, and Marie hides and later chases after them trying to save Alex. But the end of the film reveals there was no deranged serial killer, that it was Marie all along, and Marie happens to suffer from dissociative identity disorder, meaning she was both herself and the killer and not aware of it. Now, most people say the plot twist takes them by surprise, and with good reason, because the film is so full of plot holes that it doesn't at all make sense for Marie to be the killer at all based on everything that happens. But the reason I have this at number 10 is because I'm one of the few who saw the twist coming from the start of the film. There were certain things the killer did at the start that for me made no sense as to why they were happening and felt too much like they were shadowing Marie's movements on purpose, and I won't break down all of them, but instantly they made me think that Marie was actually the killer, and it turns out I was right. It still makes no sense, but nevertheless, here it is. Coming in at number 9 is one of our protagonists from 2011's Scream 4, the 4th installment in the Scream franchise, and that would of course be Jill Roberts. Jill Roberts was the cousin of Sidney Prescott and spent most of the film playing the role of victim at the hands of the new Ghostface thanks to her accomplice Charlie. But it is revealed that Jill is in fact the real villain, having been the real mastermind behind all of the film's events. Now, it is pretty ballsy to have the villain be one of Sidney's relatives, with Jill even murdering her own mother, meaning by the end of the film all of Sidney's relatives are dead. But it did feel a bit expected, as in each film the main killer had a connection to Sidney. In the first film it was Billy and Stu, mainly Billy, being that Sidney's mother was sleeping with his father and caused his mother to abandon him. In the sequel, Mickey and Debbie, with the main villain being Debbie, Billy's mother, wanting revenge for her son. And in the third film it was Roman, Sidney's half-brother, who turned out orchestrated the events of the first film out of his own resentment and abandonment issues. So with Jill being the only person left in this film to have a direct personal link to Sidney, it wasn't all that shocking. What was disappointing is that her motives were incredibly weak and petty, acting out of jealousy that Sidney has survived 5 people trying to kill her and wanting fame. Billy was the same age and his motives were a lot better, so that's why Jill comes in at number 9 on this list. Number 8 comes from Ginger Snaps 2 Unleashed, the second film in the Ginger Snaps trilogy, which makes my pick go to the character Ghost. Ghost is a 13-year-old girl who is staying in a facility due to her only legal guardian and grandmother being a patient having suffered severe burns to her entire body. Ghost befriends our lead Bridget, learning of her lycanthropy and wanting to help her break out. We think this poor girl is all alone like Bridget, and at one point we even think she has been sexually abused by one of the facility's orderlies, as we have seen him give drugs in return for sexual favors. But no, it turns out Ghost set Tyler up for sexual abuse because she was jealous he was getting attention and helped orchestrate his death. We also learn her grandmother's accident was no accident, having deliberately set her on fire. And her goals were not to help Bridget, as she ends up locking her up to make her turn into a werewolf in hopes of keeping her as a pet she can teach to sick on her enemies. In the end, the lovely young girl we thought was the secondary protagonist turned out to be the worst villain of the story. My number 7 pick comes from one of my favorite horror films, Dead Silence, which clearly makes that pick Mary Shaw. Now, the reason why I picked Mary Shaw for this list is because even though she is clearly killing people from beyond the grave during the course of the film, as her backstory is revealed, we're led to believe that Mary is killing people out of revenge for her brutal torture and murder because she was presumed guilty of abduction and possible murder of a young local boy, but was in fact innocent, as no body was ever found. So you go through the film feeling she's a bit justified in her vengeance given how she died, but as we get to the third act, it's revealed that despite a lack of evidence, the people of Ravensfair were right. She had kidnapped and killed that boy, and so while yes, she is killing out of vengeance, she's also killing because in both life and death, she was a deranged person. Number 6 on this list comes from Sleepaway Camp, also known as Nightmare Vacation, a classic 80s slasher film making that character Angela Baker. This film is full of twists, and while it was no shock to audiences that Angela was revealed to be the killer, I think revealing Angela to actually be her alleged dead brother Peter made up for it. But the way this film is structured, we see Angela being bullied and tormented during the course of the film, and her cousin Ricky being the only one to stand up for her and defend her, getting very angry and hostile at those who are mean to her. So the film spends most of its time implying that Ricky is killing people on behalf of his cousin because he's so protective. But truth is, it's kind of obvious that Angela is actually getting justice on her own behalf, and of course at the end it is revealed Ricky was innocent all along, and Angela is dealing with some homicidal tendencies along with dealing with some serious gender identity issues caused by her deranged and unstable aunt. Moving on to number 5 is a certain character from Devil, with that character being the devil himself, more specifically the old woman Jane Kowski. The film follows 5 sinners trapped in an elevator when the devil has come to Earth to collect them for himself. One by one, the individuals start dying under unusual circumstances, with the old woman being the second to go, being hung by an electric cord. But when it's just down to Tony as the last man standing, the devil reveals himself having been the old woman all along and faking her death, with her name being revealed to not be her name but Tony's last name of Janikowski instead. In films such as this, it's always the person you least expect, so it should be obvious it was the old woman all along, but this film takes a "and then there were none" approach, with the real villain faking their death to clear themselves of suspicion, which may be a classic move, but it's still a good one. My number 4 pick comes from The Others, so if you've seen it, then you would know I'm referring to Grace Stewart. Grace Stewart is a woman living alone with her 2 children in her secluded house, cut off from the world and believing her husband to be missing in action in the war. As the film's events unfold, she believes her house to be haunted, which it is, but not how she thinks. Turns out Grace and her children are actually the ghosts haunting the place, not realizing they're dead. It is revealed that Grace, after learning of the death of her husband in the war, went mad and smothered her children to death and then shot herself, causing them all to haunt the home they lived and died in. Not the most upbeat ending in the world, and maybe you figured out they were dead all along, but did you guess she killed her own children then herself? 'Cause yikes. Moving on to number 3 is our female protagonist from Saw 2, the second film in the Saw franchise, the one and only Amanda Young. Amanda was one of the earlier victims of the Jigsaw killer in the events of the first Saw film, having survived his test. The events of the sequel would lead you to believe Amanda had fallen off the drug wagon and Jigsaw was putting her through her paces once again, and Amanda gives a very convincing performance, but in truth, it is revealed Amanda has joined Jigsaw as his apprentice and is in on the entire game the whole time, being a plant, much like Jigsaw was during the events of the first film. She's there to ensure one of the characters survive, as the test isn't necessarily about the individuals trapped, but for a certain crooked cop. We knew Amanda felt Jigsaw had saved her life, but we didn't know just how far down the rabbit hole she'd gone and how much further she was going to go. My second place pick comes from Suspiria, not the 1977 original, but the 2018 remake, making my character pick Susanna Bannion. Having seen the original myself, I was not expecting the twist I got. We see Susie, our protagonist, believing she is slowly going down the path of being singled out as a sacrifice for a coven of witches. We can see the grooming, we see the start of the ritual, and then plot twist. Helena Marcos was not Mother Suspiriorum, the mother of sighs, the oldest and wisest of the 3 mothers, as she claimed to be. In fact, Susie reveals herself to be Mother Suspiriorum and massacres Helena and all her followers for deceit and following a false idol. I expected the remake to stick pretty close to the original, and as I was watching the film, it felt it was pretty faithful, just in an elevated way, so I was not at all expecting our lead protagonist to turn out to be the most powerful antagonist of the entire story, but I absolutely loved it. Finally, at number 1, my pick can be found in the classic film Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, with my character choice being the mislabeled Blanche Hudson. Now, Baby Jane has appeared on many lists as one of the best villains of cinema of the past 60 years, but a twist at the end reveals we're looking at this all wrong. Now, of course, Baby Jane did starve, torture, and brutalize her sister for many years, and you can't deny that, but who actually put these events in motion? The film reveals all of this was actually Blanche's doing. Blanche, a paraplegic, for years made her sister and the Will believe that Jane had hit her with her car, leaving her in a wheelchair, forcing Jane into a life of servitude to her sister. But that's not what happened. Blanche reveals that she tried to run her sister down and kill her after Jane had embarrassed her at a party while drunk. But she missed, and the impact from the crash left her paraplegic. Due to her sister still being in a drunken stupor with no memory of the night's events, she used it to her advantage to make Jane think the accident was her fault, forcing Jane, a woman with a substance abuse problem, to feel guilt for a crime she had no memory of and didn't even commit. Jane was forced to live every day feeling guilty for an event she couldn't recall, never able to seek help for her own mental health issues and substance abuse, and instead was forced to become her sister's carer for decades. Was it any wonder Jane went crazy? Is it shocking to think Jane would become angry, resentful, and even abusive towards her sister? Her sister ruined her life and she didn't even know it. But Blanche knew. All these years she knew the truth, and she played the role of the victim when she was the real villain all along. And there you have my top 10 female protagonists with a twist, also known as top 10 female protagonists revealed to be antagonists. I hope you have enjoyed this video and this list. As always, comment below and share some of your picks on the topic of this top 10. That is it for this video. Thank you again to Nightlife for the suggestion, and thank you to my patrons for all the continued support. Stay safe and healthy, everyone, and I shall catch you in the next video. Bye, guys.